I knelt down on my kitchen floor in a sea of Cheerios that my 2-year-old had so strategically dumped out in front of me, and I burst into tears. What could this TEDx panel or committee possibly want from me? What have I done that could impart even the slightest morsel of wisdom onto your youth, or your impressionability, or your future? And I knew it wasn't the angst of being in front of an audience that hurled me into sheer panic, because I've been performing my whole life. But it was more the fear of trying to soften into this idea that somebody actually thought that I had a story that should be shared with you today. I grew up here in Cape Elizabeth. I began acting in plays when I was 6. My mother started taking me for private vocal lessons, and I was singing Italian arias by the time I was 9. And as I got a little bit older, I learned the balance of music and theater with sports. I grew up with all older brothers who were constantly challenging my ability to do things like throw a better spiral football than them, until the day I finally could. I still can, by the way. And so I was the only girl of the family, the baby, and arguably the best athlete. I also tried to play a whole slew of instruments. I tried the baritone tuba, the trumpet, the trombone, the French horn, piano, and guitar. And the reason I say try is because I would sit and memorize the notes on the sheet music and the coordinating positions on whatever instrument I was playing, just so that nobody in that band room behind us actually knew that I didn't know how to read music. And if it wasn't memorization, I was quite literally playing everything or singing anything by ear. And I was a good student. I was in mostly honors and AP classes, except for math. In fact, I struggled so badly with math that my mother actually brought me to be evaluated for a learning disability when I was in 10th grade, and that was really hard. So let's talk about, we have music and we've got math. I want to talk about the part-whole concept really quickly. In math, you've got percentages and decimals and fractions, all of which are essential to the understanding of music theory and notation. Well, in music, this translates to things like intervals and time signatures and melody and harmony and beat and rhythm. Those are just sonically illustrated mathematical expressions, right? So how was it that I could sing and play music by ear, I could sing on pitch, and I could keep time relatively well, but I could never fully grasp the fundamentals of math or its relationship to something that came so naturally to me? I went on to a small liberal arts school south of Boston named Wheaton College, and I started my freshman year there completely unaware of the opportunity that I had been given to just be there. I excelled on the lacrosse team. I brought my team to nationals for the first time in, I think, 9 or 10 years. I set records, which I still hold. I had a ton of friends, and I partied. I also had the brilliant idea that I would just stop going to class altogether. I thought, you can laugh, I can laugh now too. I thought that because they were lecture hall classes of 75 to 100 kids or more, and as long as I passed in the work and showed up for the final exams or the mid-semester exams, that I could pass with acceptable grades. And that was until June 15th after my freshman year, when I received a letter from Wheaton College telling me that I wasn't allowed to go back to school. My second semester grades had brought my overall GPA down so low that I had lost the chance of even returning to school and being placed on academic probation. I had completely blown it. Of course, you're going to get straight D's or F's if you don't show up to class and 50% of your grade is attendance. I mean, what was I thinking? My parents had just dished out $42,000, and I went and flushed it right down the proverbial toilet. I then had to explain to my family and my friends, and most importantly, my coach, who was really counting on me to come back, why I wasn't going back to school. I spent an entire summer around my friends silently humiliated by the fact that I had been kicked out. So I tried writing a letter asking them to appeal their decision, pleading with them that over the course of the last 30 days that I had changed. But they didn't want to hear it, and I had no one to blame but myself. So I packed up all my things and moved down to Charleston, South Carolina. I followed a boy down there, another brilliant idea. And so I enrolled in a couple of classes down at a small community college downtown, and when that random, brief Southern stint ran its course, I moved back to Portland and began waitressing after my appeal to Wheaton to return a semester early was again rejected. So I went back to Wheaton that next fall, and I returned as a sophomore when all of my friends were returning as juniors. And it was about another year and a half of kind of going through the motions until I realized that I just didn't want to do it anymore. I didn't want to study 18th century literature or Anthropology 101. I had somehow, over the course of time, completely lost sight of the one thing that had been consistent in my life and the one thing that haunted me and never left, and that was music. So I came back to Portland again, and I helped start an Americana folk troupe that garnered regional success pretty quickly. I'd go to the grocery store and run into former teachers or parents of my friends, and they'd stop in an aisle and look at me and go, "So, are you still doing music?" And that, in some way, was the most offensive question to me. It was as though these people thought it was cute that I was in a band, and it affected my confidence. And it became increasingly difficult comparing myself to my friends who were going on to graduate college with degrees and moving on to high-paying jobs on Wall Street or medical school or starting their own sustainable seafood and lobster roll franchises. I just didn't even know what to do at that point. So I guess what I was feeling when I was running into these people was that while they didn't know what I was doing, what I actually was doing is that my second record was charting on iTunes. It was charting on the Billboard Heatseekers Top 100 chart in the Northeast. It was in regular rotation on a major AAA radio station, and that my third gig ever was on the Main State Pier opening for John Fogerty of Creedence Clearwater Revival. And I'm sure most of you in here are far too young to know who he is. And being 21 years old at the time, I didn't have the slightest idea either, but I didn't care because I'll never forget walking up and seeing the size of that stage. The air and the way that it smelled, the heat of the lights. I think at one point I actually stopped dead in my tracks and I said, "You cannot do this." I had just gone from my first sold-out show in a small club in Portland that held 300 to performing my very next show in front of 5,000 people. We went on to open for a couple other national acts like Lamontagne and Guster that year. We had tons of sold-out shows at clubs in Portland, a couple of sold-out showcases down at Austin, Texas's South by Southwest Festival. I had recently been engaged, I had just turned 24, and everything felt like it was in place. And then a month later, I found out I was pregnant. None of my friends had kids, so naturally I was terrified, not to mention completely socially isolated. The band had plans to tour, plans that had originally involved me, and a few of them became really frustrated by the wrench now thrown in the works because how could she do this pregnant? So I was fired. I was replaced by a younger, talented, and attractive singer, and in what seemed like seconds, my entire world came crashing down because I was losing so much of what had become my identity, so much of what had become my answer to those questions in the grocery store. And as two hearts beat inside my body for the very first time, I somehow had never felt more alone. So I decided I had two options. Number one, I could surrender entirely to motherhood and forgo my dreams Number 2, I could, as my dad would say, oh, go splash a little cold water on your face and take a deep breath and move on. Or I could do both. I was now living for something far greater than just myself. So I decided I would face my new job as a mother, and I would do it alongside a career and a passion that could only be further inspired by becoming a mother. And I spent the next 2 years working really hard on my debut solo album that I released in 2013 called Head Full of Bells. I worked with amazing writers and producers. And it was a record I was really proud of because for the first time in my life, I felt truly comfortable being vulnerable as an artist. And that was largely due to the fact that my whole perspective on life had completely shifted because of my child. Then I started working with Dave Gutter, who's here with me today. Dave is best known for being the frontman of the Portland, Maine band Rustic Overtones. And he's collaborated with David Bowie and Aaron Neville and so many more. This is a writer, producer, musician, and most importantly, my friend, who hired me, not fired me, when I was pregnant with my second daughter, June. We went into the studio, I think, just about 6 weeks after I had my second daughter and created what became the band that I'm currently touring with, which is called Armies. Our record came out, I want to say 5 days shy of opening for Greg Allman of the Allman Brothers, and it hadn't even been on the shelves for 4 months before Rolling Stone hailed it as #1 of top 15 great albums you didn't hear in 2015. We are writing, playing, touring, and recording constantly, and it never stops. So now when I'm at the grocery store and people come up to me, they ask me how I do it. My family and my husband have and continue to sacrifice so much. 7 years of waitressing 5 to 6 nights a week, rarely being at home at night for dinner, never being able to call in sick to my job as a mom. When I'm walking around like this, I find myself in mom-bee status, you know. I've arrived home in the wee hours of the morning from the studio or driven through the night from an out-of-state show, only to catch maybe 45 minutes of sleep before my day with my kids begins. Although in my line of work, I don't have the luxury of going to bed at 8 o'clock at night. It takes place at odd hours for somebody who has young children. But it's no different than any other working or stay-at-home mom. I am on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year, and there's no downtime. My path, the path that I chose, everything that's led up to it, has been all but conventional. It is not conducive to positive mental health. In fact, I would go so far as saying that I am certifiably insane, okay? It is grueling, at times unrewarding, and it has often served as a breeding ground for my own depression and self-doubt. But my greatest hope is, and my greatest success will be measured by the day that I can look back and say that my children's lives were enriched by the arts and by the opportunity to watch their mother do what she really loves to do. So if there's anything that I wish that somebody had held my shoulders when I was your age and shared with me, it is to take your time, really stop and think about the opportunities and the life that your parents and family have worked so hard to give you. If you dream about something and you just can't let it go, go after it with vigor. Be completely unafraid. The only person who can hold you back is the person you see when you look in the mirror. And I guess if you feel lost or you need directions, you've got to just be okay with asking for help. But enjoy the journey. So often we are too focused on the end result and the destination that we completely lose sight of taking the space and the time to fully digest and appreciate the experiences that help shape us into the people we hope to become or the legacy that we hope to leave behind. Yes, you will have dark times. You will endure loss and heartbreak, as I'm sure many of you already have, and you will make mistakes. But you've got to just be okay with going ahead and making them, because they are never mistakes as long as you can take something away from them and turn it into something greater or something more beautiful. But just don't give up. After all, you are here, you are breathing, you're alive. And what's greater than that? Thank you so much.